That's nonsense, and it's throttling recovery and it's throttling economic activity.
Question 11, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Union Connectivity Review recommended a multimodal review of the North Wales transport corridor, including the A55 in the North Wales mainland. We are considering this and the other recommendations in the review.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After we received the Union Connectivity Review 5 months later than scheduled, could my right honourable friend indicate when the recommendations of the review will be implemented, and will he throw the weight of his office behind a new station in Greenfield, which has already been established as vital to connectivity in the region?
Thank you, Mr. The honourable member raises a good point. We haven't got a precise date as yet, other than to say that there is some imminence to it. And I would ask him actually also to bear in mind that thanks to interventions and recommendations by the Treasury, there are other funding models available too. So don't overlook the work that he can do with his local authority around things like the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund in the future.
Order. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on the Parliament Live TV. BSL interpretation will also be available for the Prime Minister's statement following PMQs. I now call Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, may I start by wishing you and all members a Happy New Year. Thanks to the heroic efforts of our vaccination programme and people coming forward up and down the country, we managed to ensure that families could still celebrate Christmas with over 34 million people now boosted. And I want to take the opportunity to say that anybody who has not yet done so should come forward and get boosted now. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meeting later today.
Dr. Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadiq Khan's TfL in tatters and the Welsh Labour Nationalist Coalition in Cardiff Bay, an unfunded devolved disaster. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that the great British public don't need to look back at the last UK Labour government to see what this opposition's answer to all our problems is, which is to bang at the doors of the Treasury demanding that the taxpayer bail them out of their own ineptitude and incompetence?
Mr. Speaker, it's not just Labour's record in London or in Wales. Every Labour government in history since the Second World War has left office with unemployment higher than when they came in. And that's because only Conservatives can be trusted to deliver on the economy and on the people's priorities. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, this country now, thanks to the policies we have pursued, has the fastest economic growth in the G7.
It now comes to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a Happy New Year to you and the rest of the House. Mr. Speaker, over the Christmas break, the world lost a giant in the fight of equality and human rights, the great Desmond Tutu. And I would like to offer my condolences to his family and to the people of South Africa. And I'd also like to thank all of those key workers who have kept our essential services running over the festive period, particularly all those staff and volunteers working at vaccination sites and our amazing NHS staff working incredibly hard with incredibly stretched circumstances. But I know we're going to come on to that after PMQs with the Prime Minister. And I'd also like to thank the formidable Sue Gray, who I know has been busier than Santa over the festive period. Mr. Speaker, in October, the Prime Minister said that fears about inflation were unfounded. But working people across the country are starting the new year facing rising bills and ballooning prices. So how did he get it so wrong?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what the government has been, and of course I said no such thing because inflation is always something that we have to be careful about. But what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is making sure that we protect the people of this country throughout what is unquestionably going to be a difficult period, and that's why We are ensuring that we've lifted the living wage by record sums, Mr. Speaker. We make sure people have cold weather payments, making sure that they have the warm homes discount, all the other protections, the £500 million fund that we put in to help local councils look after people through what will be a difficult period. But the most important thing we can do to look after people during this very difficult time, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that we take the balanced and proportionate approach that we are, to ensure that we're able to keep our country and our society going, Mr. Speaker, and that is exactly what we are doing. And that is why we doubled down on the booster programme, and that is why we are sticking with Plan B, Mr. Speaker. And that's the right approach for the country.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, inflation is about to hit 6%. That's the highest rate since the early 90s, when the Conservatives have been in power for over a decade, marred in their sleaze with a divided party, a Prime Minister losing the support of his backbenchers and governing shambolically, and a Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, who is ready to take over and provide the Britain with a better future. Familiar stuff, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister promised wage rises would offset inflation. They haven't and they won't. Millions of British workers now face a further pay cut, and his Chancellor is handing them a tax hike. What will the Prime Minister do to get a grip of this?
Mr. Speaker, I know that it's great to be here with the Right Honourable Lady, the Shadow Secretary of State, for the future of work. We know the future of the job that she has in mind. But I wish her well. But what we are focused on, Mr. Speaker, is delivering jobs for the British people. And it is a quite extraordinary thing that there are now record numbers of people in work, Mr. Speaker, 420,000 more than there were before the pandemic began, Mr. Speaker. We have youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker, and never let it be forgotten that when Omicron hit this country, Mr. Speaker, what was their instinctive response? They said, yep, that's right, Mr. Speaker, they said they needed a roadmap, that we needed a roadmap to lockdown. If we listened to them, we wouldn't have anybody working at all, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard on the grapevine there might be a vacancy for Prime Minister soon, so maybe I should have aspirations. The Prime Minister pretends it's not his fault. He blames the global forces. He blames the market. Mr. Speaker, we're an aspirational party. Maybe the Prime Minister needs to be more aspirational for this country. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made political choices that has led us into this place. His government has failed to invest in long-term energy security. His government decided to let gas storages collapse. His government let the energy market run out of control. 27 energy companies have gone bust in the last year. And now household bills are going through the roof. Or as the money-saving expert Martin Lewis put it, there will be a seismic hit on energy bills. Can't the Prime Minister see what's happening yet again? Working families are picking up the tab for his incompetence.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she talks about energy. I think the House will agree she's got a lot more energy than the current leader of the opposition, and I welcome her point, because actually what the government is doing is supporting people throughout the pandemic. 2.2 million people supported with the Warm Homes discount, Mr. Speaker, worth £140 per week, which we introduced. Pensioners supported with the £300 winter fuel payments, Mr. Speaker. Cold weather payments worth £25 a week for 4 million people up and down the country, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, and that is on top of everything we're doing to support people on low incomes, cutting taxes for those on universal credit, increasing the living wage, £1,000 more for everybody on the living wage, up record sums. And Mr. Speaker, let me just remind the House of the fundamental difference between that party and this government. They would have kept us in lockdown in July, Mr. Speaker. When Omicron hit, they were calling for further restrictions. That's right, Mr. Speaker. We've been able to keep this country moving and keep the economy growing and keep the money coming into people's pockets, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what this Prime Minister is doing. He's increasing taxes to the hard-working people of this country. That's what he's doing. That's what he didn't promise in his manifesto, but that's what he's doing to the people. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, the poorest households spend 3 times more on their income on household energy bills than the richest households spend. VAT on energy bills makes gas and electricity more expensive. Not my words, Mr. Speaker, but the words of the Prime Minister himself. When energy bills are going to be hiked again in April, any decent government would find a way to help British families. Even the Tory backbenchers have finally accepted Labour's call to cut VAT on energy bills. So will he finally stand up to his Chancellor and do the same?
Mr. Speaker, let me remind, because she wasn't obviously listening to the previous answer, let me remind her the Warm Homes discount already, 2.2 million people supported to the tune of £140 a week. Pensioners supported with £300 through the winter fuel payment. The cold weather payments for 4 million people. And they now have the effrontery, Mr. Speaker, having campaigned, and she did too, I think, didn't she? I think. Oh yes, she campaigned to remain in the EU. Oh yes, she did. They now have the barefaced cheek to come to this House of Commons and say that they want to cut VAT on fuel, when everybody knows, and he did too, Mr. Speaker, everybody knows full well it would be absolutely impossible if they were to do what Labour would do and go back into the EU, remain aligned with the EU single market. That is the objective of the Labour Party. They can't be trusted on Brexit, Mr. Speaker, and they can't be trusted on the economy.
So, Prime Minister, how's it going? Are you okay? The Prime Minister and his Chancellor have presided over economic mismanagement, low growth and neglect of our public services. And their resolution to fix this, whacking more taxes on working people. Combine the tax rise with soaring energy prices, and the average family faces a hit of £1,200. This is an iceberg, Mr. Speaker, right ahead. So will he finally stop and change course?
Order. We started the new year not in the way we left the last one. You did give me an assurance we were going to try and calm down. So if we can, it will be helpful. Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, £1,200 hit right away. So will he finally stop and change course, or will he plough on towards what will be a disaster for thousands of families?
Mr. Speaker, as a direct result of what we've already done on universal credit, a single mother with 2 kids is £1,200 better off, Mr. Speaker, as a result of what we've done with the living wage, Mr. Speaker, introduced by this Conservative government. They never let it be forgotten. Everybody on the living wage has seen another £1,000 in their income every year, Mr. Speaker. But that's not the point. The fundamental, and we will continue to look after people throughout the pandemic. But the fundamental point is that because of the steps the government has taken, because of the tough decisions we've taken, because of the balanced and the proportionate approach that we've taken to COVID, we've been able to keep this country open, keep our economy moving, more open than any other comparable economy in Europe. And they know it, Mr. Speaker, and they opposed it every step of the way. And that's why people are seeing increases in employment and increases in their pay packets as well.
Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister always gives with one hand and takes away with the other. Under this Prime Minister, the country is worse off. Prices for everyday goods are soaring out of control. Hard-earned savings will be hit, and the wages of working people won't go as far. Inflation isn't an economic theory. It has serious consequences for people's lives. We need serious solutions, Mr. Speaker, to stop people falling into poverty or debt. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we have this Prime Minister and his incompetent leadership. And every time we are faced with a challenge, he denies there's a problem. He tries to laugh it off. He looks for someone else to blame. So can I suggest to the Prime Minister, it's not about brushing your hair, it's about brushing up on your act. Does he accept his incompetence is taking our country backwards and costing our country dear?
No, Mr. Speaker. What I tell the House and tell the country is that Labour incompetence has ruined this country time and time again, and there has never been a Labour government that has left office with unemployment lower than when they came in. And what is her answer, Mr. Speaker, to the energy crisis? It is to nationalise our energy. It was, in fact, Labour's failure to invest in supply over a decade or more that reduced our ability to have cheaper, cleaner energy, Mr. Speaker. We are rectifying that. We're taking the tough decisions that this country needs for the long term. And it's because we've taken those tough decisions, Mr. Speaker, because we've taken the balanced and proportionate approach that we have, that they opposed every step of the way, that we have youth unemployment at a record low. We have 420,000 more people in jobs now than there were before the pandemic began. And, Mr. Speaker, we not only have the most open society and economy in Europe, but we also have the fastest economic growth in the G7. Completely contrary to what she has just said, Mr. Speaker. And that is because of our stable, balanced and proportionate approach. And when never let it be forgotten, when Omicron presented itself, what did they go for? They reached for the lever of more restrictions. They said lockdown, Mr. Speaker. We said boosters. They carp from the sidelines. We get on with the job.
More. You won't get more at this rate, will you? Mr. Penrose has been waiting patiently. Why do you not want to hear him? Because I do. John Penrose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The biggest factor driving up our fuel bills and cost of living is the skyrocketing international price of gas, which is currently dancing to a tune set in Moscow. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that Labour's short-term proposals to shift the burden from bill payers to taxpayers won't address this fundamental underlying problem at all? That the crisis demands structural reform to the energy price cap rather than just resetting it later this year, and energy self-sufficiency to uncouple us from Russian gas as well?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend, and he is completely right, and that's why this government is taking the tough decision to invest in the long-term future of our energy supply, investing in massively increasing our supply of renewables, but nuclear as well, Mr. Speaker, and that is the right way forward for this country. And I think it is absolutely, and it was Labour, of course, who completely failed to take those decisions, with the result that nuclear in particular fell away dramatically. And it is absolutely farcical that their answer today, Labour's answer today to the energy price rises, which my honourable friend correctly diagnoses, is to nationalise our energy. Yes, it is. Is it? Well, maybe they've changed their minds now, but it was. Maybe they've had a second. Maybe they've had a third. But their answer was to nationalise our energy sector and to send bills even higher, and that is not the way forward.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I wish you, colleagues and all staff, a good new year? Mr. Speaker, over the last few weeks, serious warnings have grown over the Tory cost of living crisis, which will hit the majority of families over the coming months. New research from the Resolution Foundation has found that, on average, that families will be £1,200 worse off from April as a result of Tory cuts, tax hikes and soaring energy bills. Now, for members of the Tory government, £1,200 might not seem very much. For the Foreign Secretary, it is just another taxpayer-funded lunch in Mayfair. For the Prime Minister, it's just a roll of fancy wallpaper for his taxpayers-funded flat. But for the vast majority of families, losing £1,200 a year will be catastrophic. For some, it will mean that they can't afford to pay their rent and bills, to heat their homes or to put food on the table. So will the Prime Minister apologise for leaving millions of families worse off? And will he commit to an emergency financial package to reverse his Tory cost of living crisis?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I find that criticism hard to take from the humble crofter, if I may say. But what we are doing, with whom, as I stressed, Mr. Speaker, I have normally very, very good relations off the pitch. But what we are doing is helping families up and down the country, tapering, making sure that a single mother with 2 kids gets £1,200 more on universal credit, £1,000 more as a result of the increase to the living wage. But the crucial thing, Mr. Speaker, that I'm trying to get over this afternoon is that we, unlike virtually any other European economy, have been able to keep going and keep people in work, and we've now got more people in work than there were before the pandemic began. That is because of the balanced and the proportionate approach that we've been taking, and I think his support will be welcome and deserved.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a Tory cost of living crisis. So much for a new year, a no start, because it's the same nonsense from this failing Prime Minister. We've had the year of Tory sleaze, but now we've got the year of Tory squeeze for family budgets. Economists have warned that UK living standards will worsen in 2022, with the poorest households hit hardest by Tory cuts, tax hikes and soaring inflation driven by his government's policy. Under this Prime Minister, the UK already has the worst levels of poverty and inequality in North West Europe. Now the Tories are making millions of families poorer. In Scotland, the SNP government is mitigating this Tory poverty crisis by doubling the Scottish child payment to £20 per week. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, will he match the Scottish Government and introduce a £20 child payment across the UK? Or will the Tories push hundreds of thousands of children into poverty as a direct result of his policies?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, he's talking, I'm afraid, total nonsense. And this is a government that is absolutely determined, as I've said, throughout this pandemic, to look after, particularly to look after the poorest and the neediest, which is what the Chancellor did with all his packages were extremely progressive in their effect. And when I came in to office, we made sure that we uprated the local housing allowance, because I understand the importance of that allowance for families on low incomes. We're supporting vulnerable renters. That's why we're putting money into local authorities to help families up and down the country who are facing tough times. But his fundamental point is wrong. He's just wrong about what is happening in this country. Actually, if you look at the statistics, Mr. Speaker, economic inequality is down, Mr. Speaker, in this country. Income inequality is down, Mr. Speaker, and poverty is down. I'll tell you why, because we get people into work. We get people into jobs, Mr. Speaker. That is our answer.
Robert Deal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The London Borough of Bromley has achieved the fastest and most significant improvement in children's services of any local authority in England. Much of that credit is due to its exceptional Chief Executive, Mr. Adi Adetosoye. Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating Mr. Adetosoye upon his appointment as a Commander of the British Empire in the New Year's Honours List, and congratulate the Conservative majority on the Council on delivering the only debt-free council in London?
I can't believe that Hillingdon isn't included in that list, Mr. Speaker, but it is no surprise to me that Bromley it runs such a tight ship. I've been familiar with Bromley over many, many years. He and I have campaigned there together, and I commend particularly Ade Desoye, CBE, on his achievement.
Ed Paul, Ed David.
Happy New Year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Prime Minister will want to join me and my Liberal Democrat colleagues in welcoming the new member for North Shropshire. Mr. Speaker, people's already high heating bills are about to jump by over 50%, with average energy bills rising by nearly £700 a year. Gas price rises will push millions more families into fuel poverty, when we know many are already afraid even to open their heating bills. Does the Prime Minister accept that he could be doing much, much more than he is doing to prevent millions of people going hungry and cold this year, while he remains, for now at least, in the warmth and comfort of number 10?
Mr. Speaker, of course, I welcome the Honourable Lady to her place. But for the rest of what he had to say, Mr. Speaker, I think balls was the word. I think you were right first time. I think I can. Your word, Mr. Speaker, not mine. And I simply advise the House to go back over what I have just said about all the protections we're putting in place already. The winter fuel payments, the warm homes allowance, what we're doing to support pensioners, the £620 million we're putting in to support local councils, Mr. Speaker. And if he talks about long-term energy solutions, is this the same Ed Ball-Davey who was an energy minister, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hospitalisations in London have peaked, so the Prime Minister was absolutely right to hold his nerve on new restrictions in the last few weeks. But does he agree the NHS faces not just Omicron staffing absences, but permanent and dangerous staffing shortfalls in nearly every specialty? And will he end the cycle whereby those shortfalls continually threaten not just patient care, but sometimes even our freedoms, by overhauling workforce planning, by backing Baroness Cumberledge's amendment to the health bill in the House of Lords, having a word with his neighbour in Downing Street, and making 2022 the year we finally solve this problem?
Mr. Speaker, I think my right honourable friend's amendment may have re-emerged in another place, and I thank him for he knows a great deal about this issue, and I understand what he's trying to do. We are taking, for the time being, a different approach, which is record numbers of people working in our NHS, more than ever before. 5,000 more doctors this year than last year, 10,000 more nurses, Mr. Speaker. That is thanks to the investment that this House voted through and that opposition unbelievably opposed.
Several Roberts.
My mother, Dr. Nancy Saville, was diagnosed with dementia just before Christmas. She had a stroke a year ago. I was called to sit with her in hospital on Monday because of a COVID staff shortage, but I fear that myself, like many of our constituents in similar circumstances, are likely to be separated indefinitely when she is moved into an EMI nursing home. John's campaign has successfully campaigned in every UK nation that people disabled by dementia have a special need for person-centred care, and that under the Equality Act 2010. But in reality, there remain many care homes and hospitals where even the most minimal visits can be denied, leading to isolation and separation, which cause irreversible damage to well-being. Does he agree with me that the human rights of disabled people, sick people, and the elderly are not fair weather luxuries, and that everyone with dementia, wherever they live, has the right to family life?
Mr. Speaker, can I first extend my deepest sympathies to the Right Honourable Lady, and I'm sure the whole House and everybody who's listened will have shared her feelings and simply wish to extend their condolences as in view of her mother's current condition. And I know how her feelings must be exacerbated by the difficulties that so many people up and down the country are facing because of the restrictions we're having to put on care homes. And I sympathise deeply. We do have to try to strike a balance and to keep care homes residents safe and do what we can to prevent the epidemic from taking hold in care homes. We continue to allow 3 nominated visitors to care homes, and there should be no limit to the duration of those visits, Mr. Speaker. But I understand the particular distress and anxiety that the Right Honourable Lady's circumstances are causing, and can I suggest that she has a meeting as soon as it can be arranged with my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents have contacted me with their concerns about rising utility bills and the high cost of fuel for their cars. People in rural constituencies, like Sleaford and North Hykeham, are particularly affected by this because the rural areas are colder in the winter, many of the homes are not on the gas grid, rural people are much more reliant on their cars, and public services are very much further from home. I would therefore like to ask my right honourable friend what more he can do, particularly in rural communities, to ensure that my constituents have a reliable and affordable source of energy and fuel.
I thank her very much, and she's drawing attention to a very important consideration as we try to abate the increases in gas, in the cost of gas and the cost of energy. So for people in a rural constituency such as her own, it will be an important point that we've frozen fuel duty for the 12th year in a row, that the energy price cap itself remains in place clearly, and we're doing everything we can to help people with the energy efficiency of their homes. What we're also doing is all the other measures that I've explained to the House. But, Mr. Speaker, the most important thing that we can do to help people in her constituency and across the country is to have sustainable, clean, cheaper forms of energy. And that is what this government is investing in now, and we are taking the tough decisions necessary.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Statutory sick pay is worth £3 a week less in real terms compared with the start of the pandemic, and millions of workers are being forced to choose between isolating and putting food on the table. In Germany, 100% of workers' salaries are covered by sick pay, whereas in the UK it is a pitiful 19%. So I asked the Prime Minister if he thought earning £250,000 from his second job was chicken feed, how on earth does he expect working people to survive on £96 a week when they get sick? And if he agrees that many lives and livelihoods could be saved by increasing sick pay, will he commit here and now to raising it to the level of the real living wage?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman. Of course, as he knows, one of the first things we did when COVID struck was to make sure that statutory sick pay was payable from day one. So it's up to 75% more generous if you need to self-isolate. And the current statutory sick pay is, of course, a minimum. More than half of employees actually get contractual sick pay from their employer. But the most important thing we can do, Mr. Speaker, is ensure that we continue to keep people in work, in jobs, and in higher wage, higher skilled jobs, and that is what we are doing.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Later today, I'll be seeking to introduce a bill to extend auto-enrolment to pensions for everyone aged over 18, including part-time workers. That would see trillions of pounds in long-term savings, levelling up the retirements of workers, especially women, in the towns and villages of North West Durham and across the country. As the Prime Minister seeks to build back better from the global pandemic, Will he throw his weight behind these important changes that would benefit workers across our United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, over 10 million people have been automatically enrolled into workplace pensions already. That's put another 28.4 billion into pensions, so it's a great success. But I'm sure that my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Pensions, will be listening closely to what he has said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know the Prime Minister is happiest at Peppa Pig world, but in the real world, people in Southwark face rising energy bills, rising shopping costs, and a new Tory tax. But leaseholders also face huge costs for fire safety works post-Grenfell required by his government. So will the Prime Minister try and keep just one promise in 2022 and protect all leaseholders from those costs? And will he back the cross-party campaign to make those works exempt from VAT to add £1 billion to the Building Safety Fund?
I thank the honourable gentleman. Actually, I think what most Londoners want is protection from high-taxing Labour councils. In my experience, but what they will also get is we will deliver on our pledge to protect residents from serious fire safety risks, and also to manage the injustice that leaseholders face, Mr. Speaker. And the House can look forward to being updated shortly.
Simon Felt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The very best of British science has been on display over the last 18 months, being responsible for the design and the manufacture of many of the vaccines that have kept us safe during this pandemic. BASE's focus on making the UK the best place to practice life sciences and to innovate is therefore welcome, as is their cluster strategy. With that in mind, would my right honourable friend back Ulverston as being the pioneer place for the cluster strategy to be rolled out, enabling high wage and high growth jobs to be based in my constituency of Barrow and Furness?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because we're going to get on with our job of levelling up across the whole of the UK, making sure that every part of this United Kingdom shares in our ambition to be a science superpower, which is what we are and what we will be, Mr. Speaker. Ulverston has a rich history in the life sciences, and we are in regular consultation, not just officials in BASE are in conversations with him and with officials in the sector to see what more we can do for further investments in the area.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, a number of people in my Stockport constituency have contacted me about the lack of NHS dentists and the prohibitive cost of private dental treatment. Just a few weeks ago, one constituent contacted me and said, "I work full-time as a mental health support worker. I'm on minimum wage and can barely afford the reduced NHS dental costs. In the past 3 months, I've had to go to the emergency dentist 3 times for the same tooth, with the infection initially getting so bad I collapsed at work. The problem is not being dealt with because you need a second appointment, which isn't classed as an emergency and thus needs your regular dentist. Does the Prime Minister agree that stories like this amount to nothing less than a national scandal? And what steps will he take to reduce the backlog of NHS dental appointments? And further, will he commit to increasing the number of NHS dentists across England?"
I thank him, but it goes to show why it's so important to keep this country going, Mr. Speaker, and to keep people going to the dentist, because one of the troubles we've had during lockdown, people haven't been going. 10 million unfilled fillings, I'm told, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're putting record investment into dentistry, into the NHS. £36 billion for all their caterwauling, Mr. Speaker. They opposed that investment.
Can we remedy the current flawed budgetary process whereby it's possible to build 14,000 new homes in my constituency without any commensurate increase in general practice capacity? But as we house the next generation, we must make sure that the infrastructure goes in at the same time.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why and I thank him, and he's completely right. You can't build new homes without putting in the infrastructure to go with it, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we have a colossal programme of infrastructure investment, the biggest for a century, and that's why we're investing not only in more GPs, Mr. Speaker, but another £250 million into more GP practices, and they're cachinnating away as usual. They voted against that spending.
Mr. Speaker, millions across the United Kingdom are facing great difficulty with their energy bills. 30% of those bills are actually driven by the government in the form of VAT and various green levies. Now that we've left the EU, Prime Minister, can we use our Brexit freedom to at least review the VAT on those bills? And given that some of the green levies are spent on madcap ideas such as subsidising Draxby Power Station to the tune of £1 billion a year to bring wood chips from America when there's fuel down the road, can we have a review of the green levy as well so that people are not forced with a burden of unsustainable fuel bills?
I thank the right honourable gentleman. I can tell him that we are addressing the issue of fuel. Don't forget the cap is still in place, Mr. Speaker, and what we will do, and all the mitigations that I've talked about are there, Mr. Speaker. But we are determined to do what we can to help people through this pandemic, and we will. But what we must do above all is make sure this country has a better supply of cheap and affordable energy, which they hopelessly refused to institute during their 13 wasted years in government.
Speaker, last week my constituent Edna Constable turned 100 years old. She lived through the Second World War, and now of course she's living through a pandemic. Will my right honourable friend join me in wishing her a belated happy birthday? And will he pay tribute to the care workers who are taking care of her, not just in Fountain care homes, but across my constituency and across the rest of the country, who go over and above to protect the most vulnerable in our society?
Well, can I thank him very much and say that I want to thank all the staff at Fountain Care Home and everything that they've been doing to look after people throughout the pandemic. But in particular, I want to join my honourable friend in wishing the centenarian Edna a very, very happy 100th birthday.
Charlotte Nichols.
No more tough questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Groundbreaking research published yesterday in the Journal of Psychopharmacology from King's College London in partnership with Compass Pathways has now established that psilocybin can be safely administered and may have significant therapeutic benefit in treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. As someone who knows firsthand how debilitating PTSD is, as well as hearing from many, many constituents who have developed the condition as a result of sexual assault or their experiences serving in our armed forces, can the Prime Minister today commit to a review of the regulatory regime that would allow for further and more rapid research in this vital area of mental health support for which current treatment options are currently sorely lacking?
I thank her very much for her question and appreciate the personal experience that she has that makes her interested in psilocybin. I'm aware of interest in this area. It's been drawn to my attention several times. Can I propose that she has a meeting as soon as it can be arranged with the relevant Minister in the Department of Health?
Lee.
Apparently the government is thinking of relaxing visa controls from India in order to get a free trade deal. Whilst a free trade deal is valuable in itself, we should not be held to ransom. Would he agree with me that our new working class voters who voted Brexit did not vote to replace immigration from Europe with more immigration from the rest of the world, any more that when they were told that they would take back control, we would lose control of the channel? So will he convince us that he's determined to connect to our supporters and control immigration?
Yes, Mr. I don't recognise the account he's given at all. We don't do free trade deals on that basis, and I can tell him actually that net immigration since we took back control has gone down, Mr. Speaker. And we will continue to make sure that we take advantage. And that's all they want, Mr. Speaker. Their answer is everywhere and always release uncontrolled immigration. That is their approach to the economy. And it's not the right way forward. That's why our Borders Bill, currently in the House of Lords, is so important, Mr. Speaker, because it enables us properly to take back control of our borders and to tackle illegal immigration, Mr. Speaker. And what would be good, Mr. Speaker, is to hear from some support from the Labour benches.
No question, Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5 years ago, when the Prime Minister was Foreign Secretary, my constituent Luke Simons was taken captive by the Houthis in Yemen And unfortunately, he's got the former Foreign Secretary sat next to him and another former Foreign Secretary behind him, both of whom have served during that period of time. Luke Simons is still in captivity in Sana'a, even though other nationalities, including the Americans, have managed to get their citizens released. Will he pledge that his government will do everything it can to get Luke released from captivity in the Yemen, and arrange that the Foreign Secretary meets with my constituent, Luke's grandfather, Mr. Robert Cummings, in order to discuss how to go about doing that?
I thank him for raising this again. I remember the case, and it's a very sad one, Mr. Speaker. I know that our staff in the FCO work very, very hard. FCDO work very, very hard to try to release people as around the world from the positions they find themselves in. Luke Simons is no exception to that, but I will certainly make sure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister to report on progress we're making.
No, is it relevant to the question we've just had? Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Order. Nobody wants to mislead the House, and I'm sure the Prime Minister wouldn't want to do that either. Earlier I quoted the Prime Minister when he said that fears about inflation were unfounded. He said he didn't say that, and yet the Sky journalist Beth Rigby has now put up the clip on social media. So I'm just wondering whether the Prime Minister would like to correct the record.
If the Prime Minister wants to come back, he can do. If he doesn't, what I would say is, it's not a point of order. Stay there, stay, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, sit. When you're ready, sorry, Prime Minister, just to say I'm not going to extend the debate. It is a point of clarification, and that's been achieved. No, Prime Minister, I am coming to you for the statement. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll make a statement on the Omicron variant and our measures to contain this virus, fortify our NHS and keep our country open. First, I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to everyone working in our NHS and social care for their extraordinary efforts in the teeth of yet another wave of this pandemic, and for all they've done together with thousands of volunteers to get Britain boosted. Since we began the Get Boosted Now campaign just over 3 weeks ago, we've delivered 10 million extra boosters across the UK. We've doubled the rate of vaccination from 450,000 doses a day to a peak of more than 900,000. We've matched the NHS's previous record day and then beaten it again and again. And we've met our target of offering a booster to every eligible adult in England a whole month early. As a result, we have a higher level of booster protection than all our European neighbours, with over 34 million boosters administered across the UK, including in England reaching more than 90% of the over 70s and 86% of the over 50s. Together with the evidence that Omicron causes less severe disease than previous variants, and the way the public have conscientiously changed their behaviour in response to Plan B, this level of protection means we're in a very different position than during previous waves. I know some honourable members might therefore ask whether this means we can now do away with measures altogether, but I'm sorry to report that hospital admissions are rising rapidly, doubling around every 9 days, with already more than 15,000 COVID patients in hospital in England alone. We're experiencing the fastest growth in COVID cases we've ever known, with over 218,000 cases reported yesterday, although that included some delayed reporting. And potentially of greatest concern, case rates are now rising rapidly among the older and more vulnerable, including doubling every week among those over 60, with the obvious risk that this will continue to increase the pressures on our NHS. So, in response to the latest data, the Cabinet agreed this morning that we should stick with Plan B for another 3 weeks, with a further review before the regulations expire on the 26th of January. People in England should carry on working from home whenever they can, wear face coverings on public transport and in most indoor public places, and take a test before going to high-risk venues or meeting the elderly or vulnerable. All of these measures are helping to take the edge off the Omicron wave, slow the spread of infection, manage the immediate pressures on our NHS, and buy time for the boosters to take effect. And those in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland should, of course, continue to follow the rules where they live. Mr. Speaker, faced with these pressures on our NHS, I know some members may ask the opposite question, whether we should go even further and move towards a full lockdown. But lockdowns are not cost-free. They impose a devastating toll on our physical and mental well-being, on our businesses, jobs and livelihoods, and worst of all, on the life chances of our children. So this government does not believe we need to shut down our country again. Instead, we are taking a balanced approach, using the protection of the boosters and the Plan B measures to reduce the spread of the virus, while acting to strengthen our NHS, protect critical national services and keep our supply chains open. We're building on-site Nightingale hospitals and creating 2,500 virtual beds to increase NHS capacity. We've bought more antivirals per person than anywhere else in Europe, and we're now working to identify those trusts which are most likely to need military support, so this can be prepared now. From the 10th of January, we will provide 100,000 critical workers in England with free lateral flow tests for every working day to help keep essential services running. This includes those who work on critical national infrastructure, national security, transport and food distribution and processing. And these tests are separate and in addition to those already allocated to our public services, such as in education, where we have delivered 31 million testing kits to schools and colleges for the start of the new term. Mr. Speaker, we have the biggest testing programme in Europe, registering almost twice as many tests as France and 4 times as many as Germany. Last month alone, we distributed 300 million lateral flow devices, enabling millions of people to get tested and keep their loved ones, friends and colleagues safe in the run-up to Christmas. But thanks to the sheer size of the Omicron wave, we still need to take steps to ensure our testing capacity reaches those who need it most. So we will be suspending the need to do a PCR to confirm the result of a positive lateral flow test. From next Tuesday in England, if you test positive on a lateral flow device, you should just record that result on gov.uk and begin self-isolating. Mr. Speaker, our balanced approach also means that where specific measures are no longer serving their purpose, they will be dropped. So when the Omicron variant was first identified, we rightly introduced travel restrictions to slow its arrival in our country. But now Omicron is so prevalent, these measures are having limited impact on the growth in cases while continuing to pose significant costs to our travel industry. So I can announce that in England from 4 a.m. on Friday, we will be scrapping the pre-departure test, which discourages many from travelling for fear of being trapped overseas and incurring significant extra expense. We will also be lifting the requirement to self-isolate on arrival until receipt of a negative PCR, returning instead to the system we had in October last year, where those arriving in England will need to take a lateral flow test no later than the end of day 2, and if positive, a further PCR test to help us identify any new variants at the border. Mr. Speaker, all these measures are balanced and proportionate ways of ensuring we can live with COVID without letting our guard down. And we can only do this thanks to the biggest and fastest booster campaign in Europe. Yet, Mr. Speaker, there are still almost 9 million people eligible who have not had their booster. As many as 90% of those in intensive care with COVID have not had their booster, and over 60% in intensive care have not had any with COVID, have not had any vaccination at all. And there are 2 million slots available in the next week alone. So I urge honourable members on all sides of the House to do everything possible to encourage your constituents to get boosted. Now, this is the very best way to save lives, reduce pressure on our NHS and keep our country open, and I commend this statement to the House.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and can I wholeheartedly back him in asking people to come forward to get their booster jabs and to get their jabs. And of course it's right that Plan B measures must stay in place during this wave of the pandemic. It was the Labour Party who made sure the government had the votes to pass these measures through this House. And if it wasn't for Labour's actions, the NHS would be facing even greater pressures. And the likelihood is we would have needed much harsher restrictions. And my message to the Prime Minister today is, despite the people sat behind him and those eyeing up his job alongside him, Labour will always act in the national interest and put the public health before party politics. Now, the Prime Minister has said we have to ride out this Omicron wave, but the NHS isn't surfing. It's struggling to stay afloat. We've now seen several hospital trusts declare critical incidents, meaning they are unable to provide services for cancer and heart disease patients. In my home of Greater Manchester, non-urgent surgery is being halted. I thank those trusts who have come forward and been upfront about the reality that they are facing, and our NHS staff who are going above and beyond once again to get us through this period. Isn't it time for the Prime Minister to be straight with people and give a frank assessment of the state of our NHS? He mentions the use of the army, but how many trusts have declared a critical incident, and what does the Prime Minister plan to do about it? People in the North East are being told to call a cab or phone a friend if they are suffering a suspected heart attack or stroke. That's shocking, Mr. Speaker. But even before Omicron hit, thousands of suspected heart attack and stroke victims in England were forced to wait over 1 hour and 40 minutes for their ambulance. Isn't the truth that our health service went into this wave of infections with the largest waiting lists on record, the longest waiting times on record, and major staff shortages? After a decade of Tory mismanagement, the NHS wasn't prepared for COVID and didn't have the spare capacity to cope with Omicron. It's not just that the Conservatives didn't fix the roof when the sun was shining, they dismantled the roof and removed the floorboards. Now, Mr. Speaker, getting testing right remains the best way to avoid further restrictions. It's welcome that the government is requiring daily testing to protect critical national infrastructure, but this won't begin until next week, and our essential services are buckling under the pressure right now. Doctors, nurses, carers, teachers and pupils can't get the tests they need now to do 2 tests a week. Emergency workers are reportedly stuck in isolation because they can't get their hands on a test. So why did the Health Secretary claim on the 13th of December that there is no shortage of actual tests? Why was the government's delivery service allowed to go on holiday over Christmas with no contingency plan in place? The government has been asleep at the wheel, Mr. Speaker, and the result is total shambles. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in thanking the Welsh Labour government for sharing 4 million tests with England. Thank goodness they had the foresight to plan ahead and secure enough tests for this period. Mr. Speaker, in April 2020, the government published a strategy to scale up COVID-19 testing programmes. They promised to work with the UK's world's leading diagnostic companies to build a British diagnostics industry at scale. Yet 2 years on, this has never materialised. How much taxpayers' money was spent on this programme? And why, Prime Minister, 2 years into the pandemic, are we still reliant on tests from China instead of building the capacity to make the tests here in Britain?
Why are you buying abroad?
Mr. Speaker, people, he can shudder away, but he'll have his opportunity in a minute. People will be returning to work this week, but the government is refusing to guarantee all workers sufficient sick pay, leaving working people with the choice of going to work to feed their families or staying at home to protect public health. Will the Prime Minister finally raise sick pay so that people are no longer faced with an impossible choice of doing the right thing or feeding their family? And Mr. Speaker, in some of the poorest countries in the world, less than 10% of the population are vaccinated. This is shameful. We know we can do more to assist the international vaccine efforts. And what is the government doing about this? And if we are going to break this endless cycle of new variants, we have to vaccinate the world. This is not just a question of doing the right thing for others, it's in our national interest too. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there are Conservative members sat behind the Prime Minister who have spent recent weeks attacking hard-working public servants. Isn't it time that the Prime Minister stood by our experts, professionals and officials that are doing all they can to protect public health? If he was happy to defend Dominic Cummings, the former Health Secretary, and Owen Paterson, why won't he defend those public servants who are actually doing the right thing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to attacking hard-working public servants, why does she continue to attack our testing operation, for instance, Mr. Speaker, which has done a fantastic job throughout this pandemic? And there were several things in that intervention, Mr. Speaker, which was simply completely the inverse of the truth. We are not cutting cancer services, Mr. Speaker. We've invested more in oncologists. We've got 4% more oncologists this year than last year, 5% more radiologists, and she asked about ambulances. And yes, of course, everybody should get an ambulance who needs one. That's why we've invested 55 million more in the ambulance service. There are 500 more ambulance staff now than there were in 2018, Mr. Speaker. 10,000 more nurses, 5,000 more doctors than there were last year, and that is because the investment that we are making, £36 billion, every penny piece of which they voted against, Mr. Speaker. And to come to testing, I mean, it really is extraordinary that they run down this country and its achievements time and time again. Look, Mr. Speaker, we're doing 520,000 PCR tests every day, 1.25 million tests every day. We've tested 400 million, done 400 million tests in the country. More tests per head in this country than any other European country. She talks about schools. We delivered 31 million tests to schools in the run-up to Christmas. And she made an incredible point, Mr. Speaker. She said that this country didn't have its own diagnostics capabilities. She doesn't know what this country is doing. Unbelievable. We have let me tell the opposition front bench. We have the largest lateral flow manufacturing company facility in this country. Go and visit it, Mr. Speaker. They don't know what they're talking about. It's in Nottingham, Mr. Speaker, and we buy them all. And by the way, she talks about the testing regime. It's thanks to the efficiency of our testing regime that the leader of the opposition, whom we wish well, is not currently in his place. It's thanks to the testing regime, Mr. Speaker. She's able to speak from that dispatch box at all. So she might as well support it, Mr. Speaker. They've done an incredible job. Two final points, Mr. Speaker. They voted continually against our funding for the NHS that has made this possible, and let's be in no doubt, they would have kept this country in lockdown from July the 19th. They were opposing, and members of the front bench chorused that we needed tougher restrictions as we came into Omicron, and they said we needed a roadmap for lockdown. That was their approach. And what would have been the result, Mr. Speaker? Another body blow to the UK economy and to our ability to fund our NHS. And that is the fundamental difference between this government and that opposition. We have a plan for getting through COVID. All they do is carp from the sidelines.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I commend my right honourable friend for resisting calls from the Labour Party and others for more restrictions before Christmas, and also for the changes that he has announced today. Omicron is less serious than previous variants. We will see new variants appear in future, and the likelihood is that they will continue to be less serious. It is not in the national interest to partially or wholly shut down sectors of our economy every time we see a new variant. So will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to inform the House as to whether and how the government will be changing its approach when new variants arrive?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and of course she's totally right in what she says. We simply cannot go on as a country and as a society by reaching endlessly for lockdown, which is their instinct, no matter what the cost, no matter what the damage it does. We have to remain cautious, Mr. Speaker, and I'm afraid I can't tell the House that we can rule out absolutely everything to protect the public, but I am confident, as I said to the country last night, I am confident, Mr. Speaker, Speaker, and that's why I'm repeating it today. I'm confident that we can get through this wave of Omicron with the measures, with the balanced and proportionate approach that we are taking. And I'm glad to have her support, Mr. Speaker. And for the future, what we need is the multivalent, the polyvalent vaccines that can deal with any type of COVID mutation, any type of variant, as well as the therapeutics, Mr. Speaker, and that is what we're investing in as well. And as she should know, more per head than any other country in Europe.
Leader of the SNP in Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. I hope the Prime Minister had a safe and restful break, and his festive parties were perhaps more sensible and legal than they were in 2020. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is right that the booster programme is absolutely crucial. Getting a booster reduces the chance of getting COVID, protects against serious illness and helps reduce pressure on our NHS. But the Prime Minister's central approach to ride out the Omicron wave is a reckless gamble that risks lives and risks the NHS. Let's talk about what ride it out means. It means allowing the Omicron variant to rip through communities. It means avoidable deaths, long COVID and stretching the NHS to breaking point. That's why the correct approach is to show continued caution and to slow transmission. This is the proactive, sensible and cautious approach being taken by the Scottish Government and the other devolved nations, and it is the UK Government that is once again out of step. But recklessness has been the hallmark of this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has acknowledged parts of the NHS will feel temporarily overwhelmed. But hospitals in England are already overwhelmed, with heart attack patients being told to make their own way to hospitals. How appalling, Prime Minister. What a failure. So will the Prime Minister now listen to his own Chief Scientific Advisor and Chief Medical Officers who've acknowledged that the disease is moving up the age ranges and that we can expect increased pressures on hospital? And will the Prime Minister act to slow the rate of transmission? Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the Prime Minister has no choice but to ride it out because he's too weak to get a more cautious and sensible approach past his divided cabinet and his mutinous backbenchers. And the Prime Minister knows that he doesn't carry the moral authority to protect the public when he's broken previous restrictions himself. The public is faced with a Prime Minister who does not have the political leadership or the authority to act to keep these islands safe. So will the Prime Minister finally acknowledge that he's riding it out, is risking lives and the NHS because his backbenchers are now calling the shots?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman should take back what he said, no, Mr. Speaker, because I tell you what, I think that he should be respectful of the traditions of this House, which is you don't accuse people of things that they haven't done, Mr. Speaker, and it is totally untrue. This government has taken a
order. Prime Minister, Mr. Blackford. Please, we just want to calm it down. This is a new year. Let's start off as we mean to go on, not in the way that we're behaving. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the Scottish National Party continues to do serious economic damage in the way that they do, we will continue to get on with a balanced and a proportionate.
Order. No, either we behave, or I don't need any advice from anybody over there either. That's the last thing we need. I'm just saying, I think we just need to calm it down. It's a very important debate that the country is watching. They want to hear what's going on. Catcalling across the chamber is not good for anybody. Prime Minister.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, and I think that what we need to do is get on together with a plan that is both balanced and proportionate, and I think does a huge amount to protect the public and is the right way forward in dealing with Omicron. And he says, Mr. Speaker, that the UK government is out of step with what Scottish Nationalist Party want. Actually, overwhelmingly, we do the same thing at the same time, and there is far more that unites us than divides us. And that is the reality. You may not like it, but that is the reality. And Mr. Speaker, I must say I do take exception to the language used by the right honourable gentleman. And Mr. Speaker, I think that when it comes to the Union, he should reflect on the great success that has been achieved by UK scientists working together on vaccines, the formidable effort of test and trace operations that I've seen myself in Glasgow and elsewhere, the heroic actions of the British Army in ferrying vulnerable people who needed urgent COVID treatment from remote Scottish islands to the places where they needed care, to furlough, which was a huge operation, many billions of which were spent in Scotland, and a fine thing too. And I think he should take back some of his more intemperate remarks. I don't think they do him any credit at all. And I think what we should do is do our level best to work together in a civilised and collegiate way to get through this pandemic. And that is what this government intends to do.
Can I just say I didn't hear what was said because people are chunnering at the same time. I wanted to calm it down. I wanted to use language that is appropriate to this chamber. So please, make sure that we treat each other with the respect that I expect from all of you going forward. Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on his balanced approach, unlike that of some other people in this House. There is increasing concern amongst epidemiologists, modellers, oncologists and scientists about the use of modelling and forecasts. Amongst the comments are that the forecasts which we may have been using for the last 2 years are almost hysterical, lurid, spectacularly wrong, consistently overconfident and substantially inflated. And those are comments from scientists, not from journalists or politicians. Does he trust the modelling that he is getting? And would the government consider an inquiry into the use of modelling and forecast, many of which have been found to be unrelated to reality?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much, and I think it's very important for everybody to understand the limitations of what a model is. These are not forecasts. They're mathematical projections based on the data that the modellers currently have, particularly when it came to Omicron, about severity of the disease. And that is why, when you feed the assumptions about severity that are excessive into the models, you will get results that come out excessive. And that, I think, is what he's driving at. I think if you look at some of the models, some of the calculations, they're much closer to what is in fact happening now. Models are useful. They can't be dispensed with. You need to have projections. What I don't think we should be doing in this House is in any way trying to undermine or attack the independent scientists whose independence is absolutely vital for our ability to handle this disease.
Chris Bryant.
Gosh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's quietly waiting for half an hour or so. Can I ask the Prime Minister, he knows perfectly well that one of the big issues facing the NHS is capacity, in particular in the workforce. Can I just make some very simple suggestions that could have an effect very, very quickly? First of all, to reward people for staying on in the NHS right the way through to retirement, to reward people for returning from retirement, to make sure that we deal with the gender pay gap, because that's what's making it very difficult for many women to stay on in the profession, provide sabbaticals so that people don't burn out in the profession, and finally deal with the problem of overtime, which is now barely worth doing for lots of doctors and nurses. If we increase that, maybe we'll be able to increase the capacity and be able to save many more lives.
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman. We are doing everything we can to ensure flexibility in the NHS so that staff can move more easily by electronic passes and so on from one place to another. We're getting many doctors back to the service. We've got our volunteers, as you know, both in both in the vaccine rollout and now in helping hospitals with the current pressure. But more fundamentally, what we're doing is recruiting large numbers of NHS staff, and there are now more people working in the NHS than at any time in its history. About 50,000 more, all told, this year than last year, and that is as a result of the investments that we're making.
Red Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the changes that the Prime Minister has announced. All of us should want to be protected by vaccines rather than restrictions in the future. He'll be aware that on New Year's Eve, the UK Health Security Agency published a report that says that booster doses wane in their protection against infection, but not against severe disease, after 10 weeks. Given that NHS and care workers started having their booster doses in the middle of September, over 16 weeks ago now, is it right to consider that these vital workers should be given a fourth dose, as is happening for similar workers in Israel?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. I think he's making a very important point. I know that the JCVI is continuing to keep fourth jabs under continuous review.
David.
Mr. Speaker, parents, teachers and pupils are incredibly nervous that due to the unprecedented spike in COVID numbers, children might once again face hundreds of thousands of hours of lost learning. The reality is that due to staff shortages, many of our schools are at breaking point. An entire generation has already lost years of learning that they might never get back. So will the Prime Minister do the right thing and properly fund a catch-up programme, starting by providing every parent with a £30 catch-up voucher for every day their child misses school? Mr. Speaker, this government is not only letting down millions of children, but by short-changing them, damaging the future of our country.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's why it's so important to keep schools open. And that's why it's so important to take the balanced and proportionate approach that we have. And that's why it's very important to ensure that schools are safe. And I thank parents and teachers for everything that they are doing. But he's wrong about what he says about catch-up. We're investing massively in catch-up. We've got a £5 billion programme of investment in catch-up, Mr. Speaker, and we are innovating the whole time, particularly with investment in one-to-one tuition or 1 to 2 or 3 tuition for kids who need it. And that is a huge development which is of massive benefit to pupils up and down the country.
Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today, and also to people like Dr Tim Cooper in my constituency who took up the Prime Minister's challenge and enabled absolutely everybody eligible in my constituency to be able to have their boosters over the Christmas period, with walk-in clinics continuing until Sunday of this week. But can the Prime Minister also take care to remember some particularly younger residents who have had COVID and have had to wait until they can have their booster through no fault of their own? And can the situation of those individuals be taken into account if any new measures are considered, or indeed whether he can think about ways that we could perhaps ease the restrictions on their access to boosters?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend makes a very important point, and it's a fundamental point about fairness. So I think, and it was raised with me last night in the press conference, I think by one of the public questioners, it wouldn't be fair to insist on boosters as meaning that you've been vaccinated until young people in particular have had a chance to get boosted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've seen a huge demand for tests, for LFT tests. Doesn't the Prime Minister regret his press conference where he urged everyone to get tested without making sure that there were supplies necessary to deliver on that?
No, Mr. Speaker, because it's thanks to the efforts of the NHS, the testing operation, that we've been, and testing manufacturers, not just around the world, but in this country, a stupefying ignorance displayed by the Labour front bench, which means that we've been able to triple our testing capacity, and we are testing more per head than any other European country. Usually they love these European statistics, Mr. Speaker. they seem a bit shy about this one, but that is the reality. Testing is a good thing. It's very important that people do it, and people should certainly get a test.
Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, and I've certainly disagreed occasionally with my right honourable friend in the course of this crisis, but I also certainly credit him with doing his very level best to preserve freedom and lives and prosperity in this country. But he'll know, as I know, that the public are now yearning to know when we're going to get back to the old normal. Investors need to know, the wider public need to know, and every business person in the country needs to know when the sword of Damocles won't be hanging over them of further restrictions. Will you please bring forward a plan to get back to the old normal?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend that the plan is the one that we have in place, and it is to get on with Plan B, and there will be a review point as he knows. It expires, as he knows, on the 26th of this month. The Plan B measures, but by then we hope to have greatly increased the already extraordinarily high number of people in this country who have not only been vaccinated but who have been boosted. Now, the number of people who have been boosted in the UK is currently 34 million, Mr. Speaker. There are a further 9 million that we need to reach, but we've already offered, as I said to the House before Christmas, our plan was to double the speed of the booster rollout, which we did. We've offered a slot to everybody, every eligible adult got a slot before New Year. What we need to do now is increase that number of boosted members of the population, and then as Omicron blows through, and it is very much my hope and belief that it will, I do believe that we will be able to get back to something much closer to normality. That doesn't mean that there won't be further challenges, but I think that life will return to something much, much closer to normality. It won't be necessary to have the restrictions that we currently have in place. Business, investors will have all the confidence that they need. But to be frank, Mr. Speaker, you're already seeing huge investments in this country because of the approach that we've taken.
I think I need to help a little bit. Prime Minister, I am here not that way to help us all. Yeah. But the other thing I would say is, I don't want to keep you here forever, but with a lot of people who are standing who do want to hear from you. So it might be easier for yourself if you could shorten some of the answers. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At Prime Minister's questions, my honourable friend, the member for Dwyfor Merieneth, very movingly raised the plight of care home residents who've been left without visits from their loved ones during the pandemic, especially care home residents with dementia. The Joint Committee on Human Rights have repeatedly raised our concerns about care homes implementing highly restrictive visiting rules, potentially contrary to the government's own guidance and in contravention of the human rights of residents and loved ones. And we've recommended that proper individualised risk assessments be carried out in all cases. Now, I noted the Prime Minister's sympathy for the plight of my honourable friend and her mother. But can he tell me this? What specific steps will his government take to make sure that visiting restrictions are proportionate across the board?
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and I want to repeat my sympathy for all those who need to visit people in care homes and for loved ones in care homes who are desperate to be visited. We have the system in place which does allow for unlimited duration visits for 3 nominated persons, as I said, which is an improvement if she remembers on where we were at earlier stages in this pandemic. But what we want to do is continue with a balanced and proportionate approach. Doesn't allow the disease to get back into care homes in the way that it did, and the faster we can get through Omicron, the quicker we'll be back to normal.
In congratulating him on his knighthood, Sir Robert Battle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure we will, on this side of the House, warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement. And I've had the honour of joining an army of volunteers at my local vaccination hub over Christmas to help get people jabbed now, thousands of people every day. It's been a huge privilege. My local hospital, the Great Western Hospital, has declared an internal critical incident. I would be extremely grateful to him and his colleague, the Health Secretary, to receive maximum assurance that the leadership at that hospital will get all the support they need in order to maintain those essential services for the people of my constituency and beyond.
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I echo your congratulations, of course. to my right honourable friend. And the hospital he mentions will get every support throughout this difficult period, and we will do everything we can to engage with my right honourable friend on the issues he raises. But that support is made possible, as I told the House, through the funding we're putting in.
Janet David.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder, Mr Speaker, if the Prime Minister would take the opportunity and to join me in thanking the Welsh Labour Government for sharing 4 million tests with England.
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr Speaker, the UK government has supplied tests to the whole country, but we're very, very proud to collaborate with people and testing organisations across the country.
Robert Jenrick.
Can I thank the Prime Minister, whose judgment was proven to be absolutely correct over the holidays. As a parent, the wearing of a mask at school may seem a small price to pay to ensure that your kids are back in the classroom getting the vital face-to-face teaching that they deserve. But it isn't cost-free. It does affect the quality of teaching and the well-being of our children. So what assurance can my right honourable friend give me and parents across the country that this measure will be constantly reviewed and will only last as long as absolutely necessary?
I can give him a categorical assurance, Mr Speaker, that masks in schools will not last a day more than we need them.
Abdul Khan, go on.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Winter is always a difficult time for the NHS, but we are now in an unsustainable situation. Last night, 17 hospitals across Greater Manchester announced that they were suspending non-urgent surgeries due to the impact of COVID-19. And at least 10 trusts across England have already been forced to declare critical incidents since Christmas. Last week, the Prime Minister said he hoped we could ride out this wave. But I don't think our hard-working NHS staff or the government's scientific advisors would agree. What additional steps will he now take to ensure Greater Manchester's hospitals do not become critically overwhelmed?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what we're doing is to support hospitals in Greater Manchester and up and down the country with record investment, but also making sure that we, as I was saying in an earlier answer, making sure that we supplement the staff with all the calling doctors back to the colours, volunteers and new therapeutic treatments and all those extra things that we're doing, Mr Speaker. But fundamentally, there's also a job for this country to follow Plan B, follow the guidance that we've put in place and get boosted. That's the most important thing we can do.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I warmly welcome the boost that the Prime Minister gave to the Get Boosted Now programme over the recess. Almost 1 million boosts a day were given to people. I want to thank everyone involved in that. Also welcome the leadership the PM showed on the COVAX facility and making sure that vaccinations have been spread around the world. Is there more that we can do, given the risk of variants emerging in places where vaccination rates are not as high as in the UK, to boost vaccination rates around the world?
I think the UK can be proud of what, and she knows this area well, what we're doing to support vaccination around the world, thanks to the deal we did with AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca. 1.5 billion doses were administered to people who needed them around the world at cost. That was thanks to the deal negotiated by the UK government. We put 478 million into COVAX, and we have a pledge to deliver 100 million surplus vaccines around the world by June this year.
Kim Blackbeard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Throughout the pandemic, people in education have worked heroically to keep our schools open and children learning, but they are struggling. I spoke to a head teacher in my constituency this morning who is currently working as a school caretaker, receptionist, classroom teacher and COVID tester. Can the Prime Minister at least admit to overstretched staff working in education that communication with schools needs to be better? and that more could and should have been done before schools returned to prevent this highly predictable situation?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share what she said about the amazing work that's being done by teachers and schools up and down the country. And I've been to many of them, and they've done incredible things to make their schools COVID compliant, to protect against infection, and they've done a fantastic job. We communicate with them the whole time, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, I think has done a formidable job of interacting with teachers, with parents, and trying to get our messages across. And I know that she'll want to be in the chamber for the statement that my right honourable friend is about to make.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In their critique, I think the opposition front bench forgot about the 50,000 hospital beds they cut when they were in power, including closing entire wards at Goole Hospital. But I digress, Mr. Speaker. Can I remind the Prime Minister of the important role volunteers are undertaking in the NHS at the moment, particularly those in services such as the ambulance service, who will be attending more and more jobs in the coming weeks and months to support our NHS. And given we're going to be relying on our NHS to quite rightly keep the economy open, can I ask him to look closely at possible future reward and recognition payments to our NHS staff for the extra efforts they'll be making this winter?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and he's making an incredibly important point about the record of the opposition, because the pressure on the NHS, the pressure on the NHS is caused by the limit to the number of beds that we have, only about 100,000, and Mr. Speaker, that is why this government is getting on with building 40 more hospitals. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And that's why we're recruiting 50,000 more nurses, Mr. Speaker, and they opposed a lot of it.
Ben.
I think. Sorry. I beg your pardon. I do apologise, Mr. Speaker. Up until now, the advice to care homes has been that if someone tests positive with a PCR test, they should not be tested using a PCR or a lateral flow test for 90 days, unless they develop new symptoms during this time, in which case they should be retested immediately using a PCR test. Given the changes to the testing arrangements he has announced today, does this advice still hold?
Yeah, good question.
No, it doesn't, Mr. Speaker, and I'll make sure that he is advised on the new arrangements.
David Boris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Morecambe Bay Health Trust has been overwhelmed recently, with people in effect bed blocking because they can't get back into the care homes. I know that we're putting tents on car parks. I've seen that on the news. I would like to say in a very helpful way, do you not think it would be right to enact in areas like mine, more sort of rural areas going north, the big Nightingale centres like we had in Preston?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, but actually what we're doing is making sure that we support hospitals up and down the country who are facing the pressures he describes, not just with more staff, but also with more facilities, with on-site Nightingales, as I said in my statement.
Kirsten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Eastern Bartonshire, along with the honourable members for Chatham and Aylesford, Bradford West and North East Fife, all of whom have been affected by the lack of proxy voting and remote participation, have jointly written to the Leader of the House seeking the reintroduction of remote provision. Clearly, this is not just a COVID issue, but we can certainly see now how much it's needed. And it matters because, as things stand, Parliament is excluding MPs and disenfranchising their constituents. So will the Prime Minister throw his weight behind their calls to modernise and ensure that no member is prevented from fully representing their constituents?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to Honourable Levy. I think I should speak for everybody here. What we want to see is the House getting back to normal business as fast as possible. And to that end, I suggest that everybody follows the guidelines and get boosted.
Steve Bryan.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister deserves real credit, I think, for his recent decisions in respect of COVID. He's followed the evidence, but he's also taken, I think, the wider view of our society and our economy, which has to be right. In my opinion, England is not out of step with Scotland and Wales. They're out of step with us. Yeah. Can I ask my right honourable friend to also, though, take the long view? Because it's increasingly clear we're a long way from learning to live with COVID, but we also have an NHS on a permanent war footing, and that's not sustainable. So what is the long-term plan for living with COVID in 2022? And could that include any changes to mandatory isolation and test and trace, as, for instance, we see different isolation dates in the US and Germany to here in the UK?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. We will continue to keep isolation timings under review. We don't want to release people back into society so soon that their workplace, they just infect all their colleagues. That would not be sensible. But as I said in my earlier answers, Mr. Speaker, I do think that we have a good chance of getting through this difficult wave and getting back to something like normality as fast as possible. And it is important that that Omicron seems to provide some sort of immunity, for instance, against Delta. That may be a positive augury for the future, Mr. Speaker.
Kevin Jones.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. It is announced that those testing positive for the lateral flow test will no longer have to go for a PCR test, but there will be down to the individual to actually inform the government of the result. Can I ask what percentage you think will do that, more importantly, that won't do that? Yeah. And as PCR tests are important for analysing the genome of the virus, what effect will that non-reporting have on our ability to actually look at new variants which will develop?
I'm grateful, but I must say that throughout this pandemic, has been the public who have continually surprised on the upside with their determination to take this seriously, Mr. Speaker, and a very, and rather than undermining confidence in them, a very, very high proportion of them continue to do the right thing, and I believe always will.
Carper.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I press the Prime Minister on a couple of previous answers? He will know that he's obviously come to the House today to extend Plan B restrictions for a further 3 weeks. He'll also know that the Chief Scientific Advisor said that COVID is going to be with us forever. We're going to have variants forever. So can I press him on his answer to our Right Honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, about an exit strategy? We cannot respond to every new variant in the way we have to this one. We have got to have a plan to live with this virus like normal forever. When is he going to set that plan out in this House so that we all know where we stand?
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, if he looks at what we're doing, the measures we have in place expire on January the 26th, as he knows, and whatever the situation may be then, and I'm confident that it will be much better. Whatever the situation may be, Mr. Speaker, we will continue with the fundamental tools that we have, that is vaccination, therapeutics and testing, Mr. Speaker. But it is important that Omicron seems to provide some sort of immunity already against Delta. And that, I think, is a point that he should feed in to his capacious brain.
Welcome the new member, Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ambulance services and paramedics are desperately struggling to maintain a safe and timely service across the country. My constituency of North Shropshire is no exception and inexplicably has seen 2 of its ambulance stations close, as well as waiting times skyrocket. With the crisis and emergency care escalating, will the Prime Minister commit today before this House to supporting my call for a full and proper review of ambulance services by the Care Quality Commission?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's very important everybody should get the ambulance service that they need, and that's why we're investing 55 million more, and that's why there are 500 people more on the ambulance staff than there were in 2018.
Michael Fabricant.
Mr. Speaker, is my right honourable friend aware that the eyes of the world are literally upon us, with the New York Times and newspapers in France, Germany and Israel, among others, talking about the Prime Minister's bold initiative in sticking to Plan B and recognising that Omicron is less serious than previous variants. They say that Britain was the first to recognise that we were the first to start a vaccine programme in Europe, and also the largest testing programme in Europe. And I ask my right honourable friend, will he still, however, maintain a watching brief on other variants? Because there may be more serious variants in the future. We just don't know. And would you also take this opportunity again of correcting what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition said and say that we are not cancelling any cancer operations?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I really think that she should withdraw that, because it is not. She did say that, Mr. Speaker. She did say that, and it was totally. She did. It was totally untrue. But, Mr. Speaker, it's because we are the most boosted, the most tested, and because we have the most antivirals of any European country, that we're able also to be the most open. And that is thanks to the efforts of this government, but hundreds of thousands of people up and down the country, millions of people who are doing the right thing.
Sarah Sultan.
Ooh, completely forgot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NHS workers say they are broken, they're overworked, exhausted and undervalued, pushed to the brink before the pandemic, now abandoned by the government. So will the Prime Minister listen to workers and trade unions and actually support NHS staff by protecting doctors and nurses who treat COVID patients by giving them FFP3 masks and properly rewarding them, not with caps or pay rises that are actually pay cuts when you take inflation above 5% into account, but with a genuine pay rise of 15%, making up a decade of falling pay. And if he asks how are we going to pay for it, he can look at the £37 billion put towards the privatised test and trace budget.
Mr. Speaker, you know, I really think that she should listen to what's actually going on in this country today. We're investing record sums in the NHS. There are 5,000 more doctors and 10,000 more nurses now than there were last year. There are record numbers of people in the NHS, and that, in my experience, is what NHS staff want to see, in addition to the extra money we've put into pay rises. That's been made possible through the £36 billion that we have voted through and which she opposed. I mean, maybe she didn't, Mr. Speaker, but I think the record will show that she voted against it.
Dr. Caroline Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, United Lincolnshire Hospitals declared a critical incident on January the 1st. This is not due to the number of Omicron patients, but due to pressures on staffing caused by Omicron cases and by isolation pressures. Local MPs have been reassured that acute services are safe and are open. Will my right honourable friend join me in thanking the staff of United Lincolnshire Hospitals for their work and dedication under extraordinary circumstances? And will he give me his assurance that he will do all he can and his government will provide all the support that is necessary to United Lincolnshire Hospitals?
I thank her very much, and I know United Lincolnshire Hospital. I remember they're going there with the former Health Secretary whose grandmother worked there, if I recall correctly, and I know what an incredible job they do. I know how difficult it has been for them, Mr. Speaker, and as I said to the House and to the country, it will continue to be difficult in the course of the next few weeks, but we will get through it and we will give the NHS all the support it needs.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Average pay in Barnsley is in the lowest 30% in the country, and those on lower incomes are more likely to rely on statutory sick pay. Does the Prime Minister accept that the shockingly low levels of sick pay in this country will impact the number of people able to isolate? And can I ask him again to commit to increasing it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in an earlier answer, we've made sure that sick pay for those who are isolating kicks in on day one. That's equivalent to a 75% increase. But what we're also doing, Mr. Speaker, because I do appreciate that some families are finding it very tough at the moment, we're increasing that hardship fund, £500 million hardship fund that is available through local councils to help people through a difficult time. What would not be sensible, Mr. Speaker, is to follow the advice of so many on the opposition benches and go for tougher measures, lock down the economy, which would be something that would impoverish the people of this country.
In congratulating him on his knighthood, Sir Bill Wiggins, or Sir William Wiggins.
My right honourable friend has touched on the number of people in intensive care. 90% have not had their booster and 60% have not had any vaccination at all. He will know that there are people out there with very good reasons not to be vaccinated, and they get tarred with the same brush as people who have been reading nonsense on the internet. Can we have better stats so that people can see the benefits of vaccination and be encouraged to take it up? Because obviously everybody benefits if they are not in hospital.
My right honourable, it's a very powerful and important point, because we should not bully or demonise those who simply cannot, for medical or whatever reasons, get vaccinated. And of course that is right. But it is also very, very important that people understand, Mr. Speaker, the benefits to them, to their families, of getting boosted in particular. The benefits are overwhelming. They're there for everybody to see. And I'm afraid that tragic statistic about people in ICU is plain for all to see.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government were right to encourage people to get tested over the holiday period. Like many of my constituents and thousands of people across the country, I went around several pharmacies and all I saw were notes in the window saying, no lateral flow tests available. That's the reality of the situation, Prime Minister. So, as the Prime Minister, two simple questions. What steps did he take before the holiday period to get an assurance for himself that tests were going to be freely available? And secondly, when did he become aware that actually millions of tests were locked away in a warehouse and wouldn't be available until after the holiday period?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we took every possible step to step up our supply of tests. We tripled the supplies, and deliveries went up to 900,000 a day, Mr. Speaker. And to listen to them, you would not believe that this was the country that was conducting more tests per head than any other country in Europe. They are simply refusing to give credit where it's due. I appreciate that huge numbers of people want to be tested, but we are doing our level best to meet demand.
I very much welcome my Right Honourable friend's announcements today. One of the best things we could do, both for public health and for our hard-pressed hospitals, is to make sure that the small but significant number of people who refuse vaccination altogether are persuaded of the error of their ways. So can I ask him to redouble the government's efforts? Some will no doubt be completely misguidedly recalcitrant, but I believe that the vast majority are persuadable. So whether through education or advertising or anything, frankly, this side of coercion, can he redouble the government's efforts to persuade those who are unvaccinated to take the jab?
Minister.
He's quite right, and that's why we're enlisting the help of community leaders up and down the country, anybody who speaks with authority in communities to get that message across. And that's why the Vaccine Task Force, as I recall, spent £675,000 on outreach to hard-to-reach groups. And what did the party opposite say? They said the funding couldn't be justified.
Samuel Wilson.
Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I give the Prime Minister credit for not rushing into new restrictions despite the hysterical views of some of the medical advisers. I only wish the Health Minister in Northern Ireland had taken some advice from him rather than rushing into restrictions, and also welcome the lifting of restrictions on the aviation industry and the need for pre-departure tests. The Prime Minister has rightly identified that one of the problems at present is a shortage of staff in the National Health Service because of the need to isolate. But looking forward, can he tell us what concerns he has or what plans he has made for when the vaccine mandate applies to health service staff? The assessment which has been made by the Health Minister will be that up to 114,000 staff will not be available because they haven't been vaccinated or won't have been vaccinated. Is he concerned about the pressures on the health service come April?
Actually, Mr. Speaker, well, I thank you, but we are seeing very encouraging signs of take-up, both in the health sector and in social care. That's a great thing, and it's a positive thing for individuals in both those professions.
Speaker, at the start of the pandemic, there was evidence that members of the BAME community
were more vulnerable to the COVID virus. Has there been any analysis carried out to determine whether or not Omicron acts in a similar way or not? The Prime Minister will appreciate that this is of particular relevance given the significant number of people from the BAME community who work in the health and care sector.
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much. He makes an extremely important, asks a very important question. I think the answer is there is currently no evidence, but what there certainly is evidence for is that the different levels of vaccine take-up and booster take-up in particular amongst different groups are certainly affecting outcomes.
Matt Kane.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Disraeli gave his One Nation speech in Manchester in 1872. I doubt he would recognise the party political knockabout the Prime Minister's engaging in over a national crisis. So what I will say, Prime Minister, about the situation is that tonight, with case rates rising in Greater Manchester, there are 600 patients across GM who can't get out of hospital due to social care staff shortages. Around half of care homes are not accepting anyone currently. This has to not do with just the pandemic. This is historic underinvestment in our social care sector. Surely the Prime Minister sees that.
Sorry, a couple of points. I don't think he knows much about Disraeli, by the way. But the Mayor of Greater Manchester actually has just said that the government is taking the right approach. And on his point about fixing the problems in the social care sector, which is a valid one, it's this government, after decades of failure by Labour to do it. Absolutely true. We are actually fixing social care. We're fixing social care, and they wouldn't even support it.
Aaron Bell.
Look at that, Mr. Speaker. I hope you had a good Christmas break. I hope you had a better break than the Shadow Health Secretary, because since we last met, he's had a number of positions. On the 19th, he said the government needs to act now, and Labour called for actions before Boxing Day. On the 20th, he said British public know that additional restrictions are inevitable. On the 21st, he criticised the delay. And then on the 27th, he said people will be relieved to hear that there are no new restrictions. we all want a responsible and constructive opposition, but does the Prime Minister agree with me? That's not opposition, that's opportunism.
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, there you go, Mr. Speaker, and it sums up all you need to know about the Labour Party, that they instinctively reach for measures to lock down the UK economy, to do huge damage. What we're taking is a balanced and a proportionate approach, and there are difficulties ahead, but we are taking the right approach. And if they're now saying that they support it, are they saying they support it? Are they saying they support? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. Let's wait for Captain Hindsight to come back.
Bentley.
The Prime Minister has made his position clear that the government will see out this current wave without any further restrictions or any new support for businesses. But he will know, of course, that the government in Wales has implemented new measures to limit the spread of the virus. As such, would he not agree with me that it would be better for Wales to be afforded with the fiscal powers required to support these public health measures, so that the Welsh Government's response is as flexible and as effective as possible?
Mr. Speaker, actually the UK government has supported Wales and the whole of the UK throughout the pandemic to the tune of billions and billions of pounds, and we supply the vaccines, we supply the testing kits, and we will continue to do everything to support the whole of the UK.
Hey, Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Friday I'll be holding my team meeting in the local pub because under Welsh Government rules we are not allowed to go to our socially distanced office. We cannot do parkrun, we cannot watch outdoor sports on the touchline, but we can catch up together in the clubhouse to watch it. Can I commend the Prime Minister for his bold decisions and ask whether he agrees that the inconsistencies in the rules in Wales are not just ludicrous, they are harming the Welsh economy?
Mr. Speaker, I've tried to be consensual across this House. I have, and to build on those aspects of our handling of COVID. Well, I was very consensual to him. I thought he was frankly, rather rude. But, Mr. Speaker, there is much. Let me put it this way: there is much more that unites all parts of the UK in our handling of COVID than divides us. Compared with any other European country, we are moving virtually in lockstep. There are some baroque eccentricities in various other parts of in Wales. I make no comment on them, but I repeat what I've said. We will continue to provide support throughout the UK.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents who are doing the right thing and self-isolating are finding out that they're getting frustrated at days 6 and 7 because they can't access the lateral flow test that they need to be able to be released early. Now, this is despite the Health Secretary telling this House just 3 weeks ago that the country had tens of millions of tests. So can the Prime Minister tell us what's gone wrong, and will he apologise to my constituents for putting them in this position?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly share the frustrations of everybody who's found it difficult to get a test during a time of unbelievable demand. And what we have done, we have taken responsibility by tripling supply and creating our own homegrown UK lateral flow testing and manufacturing capability, of which the Labour front bench was in unbelievable ignorance when this debate began.
Earlier this week, the Lincolnshire hospitals declared a critical incident, and no doubt people in Lincolnshire thought that they were being overrun with COVID. But the Lincolnshire MPs were told yesterday by NHS officials that out of all the intensive care beds in Lincolnshire, only 2 were taken by people because of or with COVID. And although there were large numbers of staff absences, a quarter of them were accounted by staff being absent because they were isolating. So the suspicion is that the NHS is not being brought to its knees by COVID, but by these rules that require people to isolate for so long. So what is the roadmap for shortening the period of isolation?
What we're doing, I thank my honour, what we're doing is supporting the NHS, supporting staff, making sure that we have as much capacity as possible. And actually absenteeism, although it's high, is not as high as it has been at some other points in this pandemic. That's no cause for complacency. What we will do is keep the period of isolation under constant review. If we think we can bring it down without increasing infection, then of course we will.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly lauds our life science industry, British universities and British scientists that have helped us get through COVID. So why then, after developing the UK Vaccine Manufacturing Innovation Centre, has the government, and this centre's been developed with taxpayer money alongside British universities, the government decided to sell it off into private hands? So future pandemics, future vaccines won't be held in public for all of us, but in a few private hands.
Grateful. I think what we're doing is investing hundreds of millions to make sure that we have a dynamic vaccine industry. And clearly, government needs to work hand in glove with the private sector, as we have done. And no matter how deep the abhorrence of the private sector there may be on the opposite benches, it was private sector, private capital that produced the vaccine success.
Mary Robinson.
At the beginning of 2020, Stepping Hill Hospital in my constituency was under such severe winter pressures that it was reaching critical Opal 4. Since then, doctors, nurses and staff have worked tirelessly during the course of this pandemic. But COVID is now taking its toll, particularly the Omicron virus. And it's one of 17 hospitals that have said that they will not be doing any more or taking a pause on non-urgent surgery. Would my right honourable friend and the Secretary of State work with the Greater Manchester Hospital Trust to ensure that they get all the support they need through this really critical time?
I thank her for all the support that she gives to hospitals in the Greater Manchester area, which I know well, in which whereas she knows we're investing hugely. I thank them for the care and the trouble that they're taking in a very, very tough time. They'll get all the support that they need.
Very brief one.
Christine.
I'll be very quick next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has to make decisions based on evidence. However, currently reinfections are not included in the UK government COVID cases figures, and that's despite warnings by scientists at Imperial College London. Up to 15% of Omicron cases could be of people who have had coronavirus before. So can the Prime Minister assure us that reinfections will be tracked and recorded in the UK government's dashboard, and if so, when?
I'm grateful, Tim, but the decision is up to the UK Health Security Agency.
Edward Timpson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the ongoing support, financial and otherwise, for our hospitality sector? particularly those where it is a critical lifeline even still. Of course, the best thing we can do for them is to take away all restrictions that remain in place, but we also have to recognise there may be an opposite scenario where new restrictions are considered in the future. To that end, can my right honourable friend confirm that weddings and funerals would be exempt from any further restrictions in the future?
Well, there are no restrictions on them at the moment, Mr. Speaker, and that's certainly the way we wish to keep it.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Warwickshire, there were 436 excess deaths due to COVID last year. Currently, in care homes, 77% of residents and staff in care homes are currently boosted. The other 23% aren't. What is the government doing to ensure that they do get the booster vaccination so we don't repeat the mistakes of last year?
No, everyone.
Often the problem in care homes is that somebody they may have had COVID recently and therefore aren't eligible for the booster, so people have to come round. But we're doing that as fast as we possibly can.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it was welcomed by both sides of their House when, in the summer, the Prime Minister came to the dispatch box to announce an inquiry was going to take place on the lessons learned. And just before we broke for Parliament, it was announced that Baroness Hallett would be leading this inquiry. Can the Prime Minister give us an update on how the panel's forming, the timings of when this will happen, and the terms of reference as they should appear?
I thank him. Under the Inquiries Act, as the House knows, it's up to the chair of the inquiry to begin framing the terms of reference herself.
Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like members across the House, many pharmacies in my constituency are out of stock of lateral flow tests, and when you try to order online, it says that none are available. Yet the Sunday Times reported this week that British manufacturers of lateral flow tests are battling with the government after their kits failed to be cleared for use in this country, despite being available in Europe. So when will the Prime Minister pull his finger out to boost testing capacity and boost British manufacturing?
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Of course, kits need to be approved by the. Perhaps he wants kits that aren't approved to be on the market. They have to be approved by the MHRA, and that's the right thing. But my understanding is that we've been up at 15% of lateral flow tests in this country being supplied in the UK from zero.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the Prime Minister for sticking to his guns and not bringing in additional restrictions over a festive period and threatening to charge people £60 for going to work like we did in Wales. However, the mental health damage done by even the threat and the fear of restrictions has been significant. Some of my constituents have actually said it was worse this time than it was actually when lockdown happened, because then they thought there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and their fear now is that this could be a never-ending nightmare. Could the Prime Minister give me assurances that mental health is at the heart of the decisions we're making feature on COVID?
He makes an incredibly powerful point, which I think should be heard on all sides of the House, to calling for restrictions as the right honourable gentleman opposite, who I think speaks for health, on health matters, repeatedly before Christmas. These have an effect on people. Lockdowns have an effect on people, and particularly on mental health.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister make it very clear to some of his backbenchers that a strategy for living with COVID can't include every hospital in Greater Manchester not being able to deliver elective surgery, as other honourable members already raised? But will he make it absolutely clear that there is a strategy that would make sure that people, for example, like one of my close friends who needs a hip replacement because she's in such pain, that there will be retrospectively the resources put in to make sure that we catch up in Greater Manchester?
Yes, and that's why we have the NHS and social care fund. That's why we're putting that measure through. How unbelievable that you guys didn't vote for it, Mr. Speaker. Not you.
Holly Mumbycroft.
Mr. Speaker, I was fortunate to visit our local new vaccination hub in Scunthorpe and speak to the healthcare professionals and staff who are doing a tremendous job of not just jabbing people very efficiently in the arm, but reassuring those residents who are still a bit nervous, it's a small number of residents, about joining the rest of us in having their vaccination. So will my honourable friend, the Prime Minister, thank those wonderful volunteers and staff across my Scunthorpe constituency for the important work they're doing and their contribution to this national effort that he is leading.
I share her sentiments entirely, Mr. Speaker. I thank the NHS staff and I thank all our incredible volunteers.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. As Chair of the Health All-Party Parliamentary Group, I've been contacted by people up and down the United Kingdom who tell me they're still having great difficulty in accessing GP appointments. GPs are working absolutely flat out during this pandemic. However, there do appear to be ongoing capacity issues. So what more can be done to support GPs to increase the capacity that's needed, because other illnesses are ongoing throughout this pandemic that must be seen at an early stage, and ensure that everyone who needs to see a GP is able to do so timelessly and safely?
I agree with her completely about GPs. They've been particular heroes of the vaccine rollout, and what we're doing, we've got 1,300 more GPs this year than last year. We need to do more. That's why we put another £250 million into supporting GPs right now.
Ben Spencer.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for holding firm on Plan B and for rolling back on the travel restrictions, which will relieve many of my constituents. Can I also welcome the increased use of lateral flow testing for diagnostic testing? But could I ask him to clarify, is it therefore the case at the moment this will only be for asymptomatic testing, so for people who don't have symptoms? If people do have symptoms, they'll still be required to get a PCR test. And if so, can I urge him to look into further using lateral flow tests for that? Because until when people have symptoms, they don't have to trundle over to a PCR testing centre, wait 24 hours to get the results and self-isolate until back negative, we will still not be living with the virus.
No, that's right, Mr. Speaker. We'll be encouraging people to do so, but it won't be compulsory.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East earlier, when he talked about the severe shortages of lateral flow tests in pharmacies, the Prime Minister was incredibly dismissive. He seemed to be suggesting he was making it all up. He might like to speak to my constituent who both phoned and emailed me on Monday, desperate to go to work the next day as a crucial frontline NHS worker, just couldn't get his hands on a test at all. I ended up popping round there myself because I had some spare tests. Can he assure me that from now on, my constituent will be able to get the tests that he needs when he needs them, so that he can go to work and do his job in the NHS?
Mr. Speaker, she really mustn't misrepresent what I said. I began by saying that I shared the frustrations of people up and down the country who have been unable to get the tests that they wanted. I also pointed out that we had a huge demand for tests, that we were doing our level best to meet, that we tripled supply, that we were making them in this country on a scale never seen before, and that we're doing more testing than any other country in Europe, and those are positives. But I fully accept that it's been difficult for people to get tests, but we are stepping up supply the whole time.
Please do back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representing a constituency with a very international outlook, I warmly welcome the changes to the travel regulations. My constituency is also very dependent upon commuters coming into central London. Certain businesses are suffering with the work from home guidance. Can my right honourable friend assure me that we will drop the work from home guidance at the earliest possible opportunity?
We will do so, Mr. Speaker, whenever it is safe. But the measures, as she knows, expire in any event on January the 26th.
Florence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents of children who are primary school aged with disabilities will have been disappointed not to hear about the rollout of the vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds within the statement. 2 Putney parents have written to me this week, one with a child with cystic fibrosis and one with Down syndrome. So they've been shielding since March 2020. They're desperate to leave shielding. They really want the vaccine. They can't get it. Could the Prime Minister say more about when the vaccine will be rolled out for children who are vulnerable, who are 5 to 11?
Yes, we've accepted the advice of the JCVI for at-risk 5 to 11-year-olds, and we'll be rolling it out later this month.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement of no new restrictions and the changes to testing for travel, which makes it far easier and cheaper for families to go abroad. But many immunosuppressed people in Redcar and Cleveland are unsure about what they should be doing in the face of Omicron. Can the Prime Minister give a message to those who were previously shielding?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's raised the issues of the immunosuppressed before, and I understand the points he makes. We've contacted 1.3 million of them, Mr. Speaker, with a view to giving them treatment with antivirals.
Bill Leicester's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His answers about the shortage of tests would have more credibility if he were to support British manufacturing. When my honourable friend from Lewisham West asked him before about why it is that British manufacturers have not been given permission to make lateral flow tests and sell them in this country, but they have in the European Union, why is it that the European Union has given them permission, but the UK government hasn't? Would he perhaps find out the answer to that? Because this will both increase the supply of tests, which are in chronic short supply, as we've heard again and again this afternoon, and it is a great way of supporting the British economy and manufacturing in this country.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's talking total nonsense, because there was no manufacturing capability at all in this country for lateral flow tests, and we now have the largest single manufacturing plant in Europe. Let me repeat that, because I don't think they knew this. The largest single manufacturing plant for LFD tests in Europe, in the UK. And of course, it's also important, Mr. Speaker, we are using them. It's also important that other manufacturers, all manufacturers who want to supply lateral flow tests, should pass the MHRA's tests. And I think that that's what the public would expect.
For the digitally excluded, the need to go online to obtain a code to take to the pharmacy to obtain your lateral flow tests has proven a real barrier. Can the Prime Minister say what assessment the government has made of the extent of this problem and how it will be addressed?
I thank you for raising a very important point. We try to make sure that we help people by delivering tests, and many pharmacies, of course, are more than happy to do it without an online booking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last summer, the respected senior journalist Paul Wall reported that the Prime Minister was accused of making empty promises to the British bioscience firms after it emerged that rapid COVID tests offered to NHS staff were manufactured by a Chinese firm. So is the NHS now buying British, or were the Prime Minister's words today about British manufacturing simply more hot air?
I really don't think that the opposition front bench have been, or indeed any of them, they haven't got the faintest idea what's going on, Mr. Speaker. They haven't got the faintest idea. They have 6 or 7 different positions about lockdown. And they simply, they came into this statement this afternoon not even knowing that this country has the largest lateral flow manufacturing facility in Europe. They didn't know it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the statement, the Prime Minister indicated that. In his statement, the Prime Minister indicated that lateral flow tests would be given to 100,000 critical workers, but the National Railways alone employ almost double that number, and GPs and pharmacists in my constituency of St Albans are wondering why they have not been included as critical workers as well. Indeed, we could add supermarket workers to that list. So could the Prime Minister please explain where that number of 100,000 came from, because it seems at the moment as though it was plucked out of the air for yesterday's press conference.
I understand the point that she makes, and I know that a lot of people would have jumped to the same conclusion that she has about what we could do. We've targeted the 100,000 that we have in mind. I mean, obviously, all the public sector has access to free tests, including teachers and everybody else. But what we wanted to do particularly was to ensure that those vital nodes like railway signalling hubs, other crucial like HGVs, that they had access to tests.
Sam Terry.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also thank the Prime Minister for heaping praise on the amazing team at Redbridge Town Hall, led by Dr Sedat in Ilford South, who managed on Christmas Day and Boxing Day to vaccinate 1,700 people, a phenomenal effort. But yet, Mr. Speaker, at the same time we hear that NHS workers across the country, in their thousands, are not at work because they can't get the tests that they need. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Prime Minister, when is he going to sort it out? When is he going to prioritise having NHS and other frontline staff, like in transport, actually getting those tests prioritised? Mr. Speaker, he needs to get a grip, and he needs to get a grip fast.
I'm afraid that he's not right, because the NHS staff, there are many reasons for NHS staff sadly being absent, but a shortage of their inability to get testing kits is not one of them. They have access to the NHS supply, but also to community supplies as well.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Letting COVID rip through our communities has come at such serious cost, placing new burdens on business, putting more risk on our health and care system, and also an unnecessary cost to lives. In York, the infection rates are on a par with London, apart from they are still rising sharply. Can the Prime Minister explain not only why tests are being rationed, but also why there is a doubling of the contact tracing time which is released to our local authorities, delaying that vital opportunity to lock down the virus quickly?
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Honourable Lady opposite is pro-lockdown. I don't think that's the right way forward. We're taking a balanced and a proportionate approach, and that's what this country is going to do.
Last but certainly not least, and Happy New Year to Jim Sharp.
The strongest legs in this chamber. I've been bobbing for the last hour and a half, you know. Can I thank the Prime Minister very much for his statement and for his reply? Will the Prime Minister outline if he intends to work with the Chancellor and the Treasury to provide a scheme for small businesses who employ under 5 people and who are having to close with no income when there is a very contagious Omicron COVID case or a close contact? Too many businesses, Prime Minister, which are viable and successful, can no longer hang on by a thread and need a further package for help right now. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, we've given very significant support to businesses throughout the pandemic. We keep it under review, but what would not be good for businesses would be to release people back into the workplace too soon so that they infect everybody else there.
Is it relevant to this?
Disappointed that the Prime Minister has left the chamber, because I did inform him that I would be making a point of order at the end of his statement. Mr. Speaker, during the statement, the Prime Minister twice asked me to withdraw the remarks that I had made in the statement. I do not withdraw any of the remarks I made in the statement, because I'm happy to confirm that everything that we have said was truthful and was about making sure that the Prime Minister was addressing the comments that we were putting. And that is in sharp contrast.
Yeah.